What does it mean, as both of you say, that the church is itself a political body? I think for a lot of us here, the idea of thinking about the church as a polity, as a political body, might be new. So, what is that? And then, how does the church's understanding of itself as a political body, how is that something that can be politically significant, significant for how we relate to politics in general?
The church as a political body is discovered in the very existence of baptism as a way of life. Namely, the church as a politics is about the shaping of souls for the future of God's kingdom in a way that makes possible the discovery of God's will in a way that there are a few other ways of doing that. So I want to say the richest understanding of politics is already in the structure of the discourses that make our lives possible as Christians. I mean, the baptism is about death and being raised from death. And that's the most basic political stance one can take. But I contrast this with the modern liberal view that, Jonathan probably gets tired of me saying this, but the liberal view is to create social orders that produce people that believe they should have no story except the story they chose when they had no story. We call that in America freedom. Turns out that form of freedom is a manipulative power grab by some over others. And if you don't believe that that story is the story that determines us, you can see it this way in terms of institutions. Do you think you ought to be held responsible for a decision you made when you didn't know what you were doing? No, that it's against freedom. But what that does is make marriage unintelligible, because you never know what you did when you promised lifelong monogamous fidelity. And that's the reason why marriage carries a history that embodies a conversation that makes a whole community glad that these people exist.
Thanks for watching this Theology Lab video. If you're enjoying it, you can subscribe to the channel below and you'll get more Theology Lab videos as soon as they're released.
Stanley had a lot of his, well, I think all of his students read was the great theorist of participatory democracy, Sheldon Wolin, who taught politics at Princeton for a long time. Many of us think he's, one of the greatest political theorists of the 20th century. Wolin has a book, an iconic text in political theory called Politics and Vision, where he tells the history of political theory in the West. And he narrates the emergence of Christianity as, what he describes as a whole new way by which humans inhabit time. And how do they do so with each other? And this packs time with meaning, because time is now not for, say, the bureaucratic state, which was the Roman imperium in which Jesus was born and died in, but rather time is for one another, where one another includes God. And Wolin says this changes the course of how we understand political existence. Right. I think that's the politics that Stanley's talking about. Most of us think about politics, as Stanley writes about in quite a bit of detail for decades. Most of us think about politics as statecraft and reduce it to matters like things like voting in the general election, which for someone like Wolin would be absurd that you could reduce our democratic citizenship to one day of voting. That means we've already ceded power. But even the idea that politics is something that happens over there, by way of series, representatives who we surely don't know and surely don't speak for us. The idea that you can reduce that to politics tells you everything you need to know. So part of the problem I think Stanley's tried to get Christians to think about is even the way we think about the question, Christianity, politics, we imagine politics as something out there, and we try to theorize the relationship between this Christianity and that. But politics is a way of being together. And what Wolin shows us is that Christians, namely the church, offered an entirely new way of being together. So let me give you an example just to flesh it out. And I've always thought about what Stanley just said about marriage is critical. So, in the church, Stanley said, you get married. He often repeated this idea in classes. You get married in the church because you're doing it in front of people who will then hold you accountable to something you had no idea you were doing because you never had lifelong fidelity before. And so you get married in public, that is the church, because they're going to hold you accountable to the vows. That's a politics. Now, think about that politics as compared to a rival politics. You get married in the state. The state gives you a license. For however long you want to stay married is going to be dependent completely on you two and the state. There's no intervening politics in there. It's in some sense the visceration of a public versus in the church said, okay, y'all are married now. It was really only the church's ability to name you as unmarried, if that came to be somehow. That thought, I'm guessing now, terrorizes us. We would much rather be subservient to the public or the lack of public, which is the state, than to a public called the church. But as Stanley's always saying, you're only baptized into one of them, supposedly you're only baptized into one of them, but perhaps you're not. One of the things my wife and I have done for years is we do pre-engagement counseling. I teach at a university, so oftentimes it's young couples. But the couple commits to, and it's a very serious conversation that takes place over many hours, over many weeks. They commit to, if something were to come up in our conversations that suggests they should not get married, they commit to considering not getting married, right? That's a politics. That's the church saying, we play a role in the most serious deliberation of your life, your deliberations of your life. Marriage being one of them. What Stanley talks about in terms of death in naming the silences is another. These are a politics that is what Wolin means by a whole new way of inhabiting time together.